Hi, I've been struggling really to define for people what a culture really is in an organization or a systemic setting. And the struggle is because it's not as much that the subject is complicated, the understanding of people or what culture is and how it drives results and change in organizations seems to have been complicated by the fact that so many different theories that are available to understand what culture really is about. So, this presentation is an attempt to simplify the nuances of culture in a very simplistic systemic model so that we can come to a common understanding of what culture really is, how it relates to change, and how it drives results in an organization. So, what really is culture? Now, in an organization, there is an external environment which is external to the organization or external to the individual, and we call it the environment of dynamic complexities because the complexities in this environment are multifold. We draw things from the environment to kind of define a context for ourselves. So these could be government policies, this could be market opportunities, this could be the state of economy. This could be population, geography, anything in the external environment that essentially is telling the individual or an organization that this is your opportunity. Then in a system, there is an individual. Now, the individual drives certain things from this external environment and internalizes to his or own conditions, upbringing, values, beliefs, education, everything, and as a result, identifies essentially what he or she can or cannot do. And how this individual takes that internal concerns and essentially translates it into a problem to be solved defines how he or she works in an organizational culture. For example, I drive a goal for myself, which is an XYZ possibility of becoming there. I get merged into a culture called an organization, which has derived its goal from this external environment. And now, how I solve problems for myself within me and within this organization in dealing with the external environment creates this mess of a culture. And then, of course, there's the organization who drives or understands an opportunity from the external environment and creates various systems and policies of strategies and rewards and structures and appraisal and performance evaluations to drive us towards a certain result. The organization and the individual organize themselves obviously in groups or teams, and the objective of these groups or teams are to produce certain results. Now, the results are the common binding factor between the external environment, organization, individual, and groups. The external environment essentially is defining a context. The individual is deriving from this context certain beliefs as to what he or she can do or not do. From this context, the organization is deriving certain goals as to what, as a system or as an organization, we can do or not do. And these goals are derived by the organization based on certain assumptions about the context. The context is the same for everybody. The external environment is the same for all the organizations on the planet, but their goals are not the same, which means essentially each and every system is making certain assumptions about the context and deriving certain beliefs and goals and strategies based on those assumptions. And it's a very critical distinction that this word called assumption in a culture, because the organization is making certain assumptions from the context and the individual is making certain assumptions on the basis of a context or on the basis of assumptions that are already made into the organization. An individual has certain beliefs of what he or she can become, what he or she can contribute, where his career or her career can go, and it's all based on certain beliefs, and beliefs are really nothing but assumptions. I can believe I'm 20 feet tall, but it really doesn't really matter, does it? Because it's an assumption at the end of the day. And these assumptions are critical in our structures to achieve results. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't work, but the common binding factor is the results. Now, what are these assumptions? In a very cultural, organizational context, these assumptions are essentially the unwritten rules of success. What do I or what do we believe is going to make us successful? So for an organization, it's the unwritten rule of success. For an individual, it's assumptions about how do I succeed. Similarly, for an organization, it's assumptions about how do I succeed. And then for the group, it's how to use the we so that we are able to get to the results. Now, that's an overall picture of a system or an organization as we understand it. that there is a certain external environment which has all these dynamic complexities. Based on that, the certain assumptions that an individual makes internalizes these complexities and goals and beliefs and desires and all of those things. The assumptions from the external environment for the organization translates to business strategies and reward systems and structures and policies, and the organization and individual combine into groups based on a collection of all of these assumptions, which are the unwritten rules of success, organize themselves into teams to achieve certain results. Now, that essentially is a cultural picture. What is culture? Culture is nothing but these unwritten rules of success or assumptions that an organization has made about its external environment, about individuals, about the organization strategy structure, and about how they've used all of themselves to organize into groups and teams. The critical thing to remember out here: when we talk about an organization culture, we misunderstand it as organizational values or belief systems or purpose or goals or strategies. That is not the culture, because that is the known. And if it were the culture, it would be very easy to fix. Culture is essentially assumptions. If you transport this model into understanding the culture of a nation, you will see that we make certain assumptions about the external environment, about various cultures, about various religions, about various kind of languages that exist. The individual, based on which geography it is, has certain assumptions and aspirations. The state has certain assumptions and aspirations. As a result, there are certain policies and groups created to achieve a certain result. The model is the same no matter which organization it is. And what is essential and critical to remember, that this whole system of culture is driven by assumptions. So as a result, in any kind of a system based on the context, organization, individual, and groups organizing themselves to achieve a certain result, and now an organization realizes that the result is not coming. Essentially, a problem is perceived in an organization when they see that the result is not coming, and therefore, when they talk about change, or when they talk about creating some change in an organization, they're essentially talking about changing the result, because that is what is visible. Now, as a result, what happens? They only attack, or they only try to solve a part of a cultural problem that becomes visible to them. Organizations, because they don't have an understanding of culture as a whole, they don't question the assumptions and the unwritten rules of success that various pockets of culture has. They see the result is not coming. Oh, it's not coming in this group, it must be about relationships. Oh, it's not coming in this individual, it must be about some sort of leadership. If it's an organization, or maybe there's something wrong with communication. They only attack a part of the problem. And as a result, what this essentially translates into, that in a cultural perspective, we haven't addressed the cause. We are only addressing a certain part of the effect. And as a result of that, any change effort, or most change efforts in organization, tends to be a 50-50 game, because they haven't dealt with the core issue. Change, that's why, is not understood to be a straightforward process. And we make, again, all sorts of assumptions that people resist change, and change is a difficult journey, and change is not a process that is transparent. And the reason behind that is that because we haven't understood the roots of what causes or what doesn't cause change, we've simply dealt with the effects, and we haven't even dealt with the cause. And we blame the change process, and we make even more assumptions on top of the assumptions that already exist for us. This is culture. A dynamic interaction between external environment, organization, individual, and groups. And what drives us and what drives that process is a set of assumptions that all the players in the system have made. And if there is a change to be happen, the change will not happen in a certain pocket of one of these four. The change essentially needs to be a question: what are the assumptions that we have made about how to succeed in this environment with respect to the individual, the organization, and the group? And unless those assumptions are transparently and fully analyzed, there is no possibility of a cultural change or a result change. Forget the possibility of a cultural change. We won't even understand the exact culture that we are a part of. Take a simple example. Individuals in an organization, and I hear this a lot, might tend to believe that if I am reporting a certain thing, I should mark my boss as CC. And you hear these lot of times that there's a CC culture in this organization, a top heavy and bottom heavy and what all nonsense we tend to hear. But what is the assumption that the individual's making? The assumption, the cultural assumption is that if my boss is not happy, I will not succeed. So an individual has made a cultural assumption of an unwritten rule to success. Now, you don't challenge the behavior by introducing a policy that no more CC. You understand the assumption and deal with it so that you deal with it at the root. And that essentially is the cultural picture. And I hope a complexly understood concept has been somewhat simplified for you. If you are to use it and implement it in organizations, it essentially requires a deep dive into what are the assumptions here. And once you have the assumptions in front of you, cultural change is not a big, difficult journey. It's actually a very fun, simplistic one. Cheers.